In the heart of Washington, D.C., a press conference was set to unfold that would not only capture headlines but also challenge the very fabric of political discourse in America. The air was thick with anticipation as journalists from various backgrounds gathered in the ornate briefing room, their notepads ready, cameras poised, and minds racing with questions. Among them was a prominent black journalist known for her incisive reporting and unwavering commitment to social justice. She had covered countless events, but today felt different, charged with an energy that hinted at the potential for change. As the clock struck 2, former President Donald Trump entered the room, his presence commanding attention. The atmosphere shifted, a blend of excitement and tension filled the air. Trump, known for his controversial remarks and unfiltered responses, had always been a polarizing figure. Yet this press conference promised to be particularly significant. It was a moment where questions about race, identity, and accountability would take center stage. The journalist had prepared meticulously for this moment. She understood that her role was not just to ask questions, but to represent voices often marginalized in mainstream media. With each tick of the clock, she felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just to her audience, but to her community. This was more than just another press conference. It was an opportunity to confront power directly and demand answers that resonated with the lived experiences of many Americans. As Trump took his place at the podium, he began with his usual bravado, outlining his administration's achievements and dismissing criticisms with characteristic flair. However, beneath the surface of his rhetoric lay an undercurrent of tension regarding race relations in America, a topic that had become increasingly urgent in recent years. The journalist listened intently, her heart racing as she prepared to ask her question. She knew that this moment could shift the narrative, not just for herself, but for countless others who felt unheard. As she raised her hand, she felt a mix of anxiety and determination. This was her chance to challenge the status quo and bring forth a dialogue that had been long overdue. With a deep breath, she stood up and introduced herself, her voice steady yet powerful, as she posed a question that would reverberate through the room. Mr. Trump, how do you respond to critics who say your policies have disproportionately harmed black communities? The weight of her words hung in the air as silence enveloped the room. Little did they know that Trump's response would not only alter the course of this press conference, but also spark conversations across the nation about race, leadership, and accountability. Background on NABJ. The National Association of Black Journalists, NABJ, was founded in 1975, born out of a need for greater representation and equity within the media landscape. At a time when black voices were often marginalized or misrepresented, a group of passionate journalists came together with a vision to advocate for fair treatment and to ensure that the stories of black communities were told accurately and authentically. This organization has since grown into one of the most influential associations in journalism, providing support, training, and resources for its members. The NABJ's mission is clear: to promote diversity in newsrooms and to advocate for the inclusion of black journalists in all aspects of media. They work tirelessly to address issues such as racial bias in reporting, underrepresentation in leadership positions, and the need for comprehensive coverage of stories that matter to black audiences. Through scholarships, mentorship programs, and professional development workshops, the NABJ empowers its members to excel in their careers while also fostering a sense of community. In recent years, the association has gained renewed attention as conversations about race and representation have taken center stage in American society. The rise of movements like Black Lives Matter has highlighted systemic injustices and has underscored the critical role that journalists play in shaping public discourse. The NABJ has been at the forefront of these discussions, advocating for accountability and transparency from media organizations while encouraging its members to challenge narratives that perpetuate stereotypes. As the press conference approached, the journalist who would soon pose her bold question was acutely aware of this legacy. She had been an active member of NABJ for several years, participating in workshops that honed her skills and expanded her understanding of the media landscape. The organization had provided her with invaluable support throughout her career, connecting her with mentors who had navigated similar challenges and inspiring her to push boundaries. The importance of representation in journalism cannot be overstated. When diverse voices are included in newsrooms, stories become richer and more nuanced. Audiences are better informed when journalists from different backgrounds contribute their perspectives. Yet, despite progress made over the decades, disparities remain. The journalist knew that her presence at this press conference was not just about her. It was about every aspiring black journalist who faced obstacles in their pursuit of truth. As she prepared for her moment at the podium, she reflected on the countless stories she had covered, stories that revealed both the struggles and triumphs of black communities across America. From police brutality to economic disparities, these narratives were often overlooked or inadequately reported by mainstream media. She felt a deep sense of obligation to amplify these voices and to hold those in power accountable. When she finally stood up to ask her question, it was not just a moment for herself. It was a culmination of years of advocacy by organizations like NABJ. It represented a collective struggle for justice and representation, a call for leaders to acknowledge their impact on marginalized communities. As Trump began his response to her question, she could feel the weight of history pressing down on this moment. The eyes of her peers were upon her. She was not just representing herself, but also those who had come before her and those who would follow. This was a pivotal moment not only for her career, but also for the ongoing fight for equity in journalism. In his reply, Trump's words would either reinforce existing narratives or challenge them. The journalist braced herself for what was to come, knowing that this exchange could resonate far beyond the walls of this press conference room. It had the potential to spark conversations across newsrooms nationwide about race, responsibility, and representation, conversations that were desperately needed in an era where truth often felt elusive. As she listened intently to his response, she remained focused on one goal: ensuring that this moment would lead to meaningful dialogue about race relations in America. The stakes were high, but she was ready to engage with whatever came next. Trump's arrival and initial remarks. The atmosphere in the press briefing room was electric as journalists settled into their seats, their anticipation palpable. Camera flashes flickered like fireflies in the dim light, capturing the faces of reporters eager to document every moment. The walls, adorned with the presidential seal and flags, seemed to echo with the weight of history. It was a space where questions could challenge authority, where words could ignite change. As the clock ticked closer to the hour, whispers filled the room, speculations about what Trump would say and how he would respond to pressing issues. The former president had always been known for his unpredictable nature, and today promised no different. Would he acknowledge the growing concerns about race relations? Would he engage thoughtfully with questions posed by journalists? Or would he deflect and dismiss? At precisely 2 o'clock, Trump strode into the room, exuding confidence. His signature red tie hung prominently against a crisp white shirt, and his demeanor radiated a mix of bravado and defiance. The crowd erupted into applause, a testament to his enduring support among certain segments of the population. He approached the podium with a familiar swagger, ready to deliver his opening remarks. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice booming through the microphone. "We've accomplished so much during my administration. Our economy is booming, jobs are coming back, and America is stronger than ever." He paused for effect, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. As he spoke, he highlighted various achievements, tax cuts, deregulation efforts, and a booming stock market. His rhetoric painted a picture of success that resonated with many in the audience who had come to hear him speak. However, beneath this facade of triumph lay a complex reality that many were eager to confront. Trump's remarks quickly turned combative as he addressed critics who questioned his leadership. "The fake news media has done everything they can to undermine our successes," he asserted, pointing fingers at various outlets. "They want you to believe that America is in decline when we are actually winning on every front." The journalist who had prepared her question felt a surge of determination as she listened. This was not just another press conference. It was an opportunity to challenge narratives that had long gone unexamined. She understood that while Trump's words might galvanize some supporters, they also perpetuated divisions that needed addressing. As he continued speaking about immigration policies and foreign relations, topics that often drew sharp criticism, she noted how he skillfully redirected conversations away from issues like systemic racism and inequality. It was a tactic she had seen before, deflecting uncomfortable questions by shifting focus onto perceived successes or external threats. The room was filled with journalists poised to capture every word, but there was an underlying tension as well. Some reporters exchanged glances. They understood that today's dialogue could be pivotal in shaping public perception about race relations in America, a topic that had become increasingly urgent in recent years. As Trump wrapped up his initial remarks, he opened the floor for questions. "I'll take a few questions now," he said with a wave of his hand, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. The atmosphere shifted again. Excitement mingled with anxiety as journalists raised their hands eagerly. The black journalist felt her heart race as she prepared for her moment. She knew she had to be clear and direct. This was her chance to address critical issues head-on. As she waited for her turn to speak, she reflected on how far journalism had come since NABJ's inception and how vital it was for her voice, and those like hers, to be heard in spaces dominated by narratives that often overlooked or misrepresented their experiences. Finally, Trump called on her with a nod. "Yes, you there," he said, pointing toward her with an air of casual authority. Standing up straight and taking a deep breath, she introduced herself confidently. "Mr. Trump, I'm Name, a reporter, with news organization. My question is, how do you respond to critics who say your policies have disproportionately harmed black communities?" The room fell silent as her question hung in the air. A bold inquiry that cut through the usual pleasantries and directly confronted issues many were eager to discuss but hesitated to voice. Trump paused for a moment. His expression shifted from surprise to contemplation as he processed her words. The weight of her question was significant. It demanded accountability and reflection on policies that had lasting impacts on marginalized communities. As she awaited his response, she felt an intense mix of hope and apprehension. This exchange could either reinforce existing narratives or challenge them in ways that might resonate far beyond this room. She knew that whatever came next would be crucial, not just for her career, but for countless others seeking justice and representation in media narratives. The journalist's bold question. As the room held its breath, the journalist felt a surge of adrenaline. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, but now that she was here, facing one of the most controversial figures in American politics, she realized the gravity of her words. This was not just a question, it was a call for accountability, a demand for recognition of the struggles faced by black communities across the nation. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice steady, yet resolute, "how do you respond to critics who say your policies have disproportionately harmed black communities?" The room remained silent, all eyes fixed on Trump. The question was direct and pointed, cutting through the usual political jargon that often characterized such events. It was a question that many had wanted to ask but had hesitated to voice in such a high-stakes environment. Trump's expression shifted from surprise to a calculated grin. He leaned slightly forward at the podium, as if preparing to engage in a sparring match. "Well, first of all," he replied, "I think it's important to recognize that I've done more for Black Americans than any president since Abraham Lincoln." His tone was confident, almost defiant. He continued, listing various initiatives from his administration: criminal justice reform through the First Step Act, funding for historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and economic opportunities through job creation. "The unemployment rate for Black Americans reached an all-time low during my presidency," he asserted, his voice rising with enthusiasm. "We were winning on every front." As he spoke, the journalist listened carefully, noting how he framed his achievements while sidestepping the complexities of systemic issues. While his administration had indeed implemented some policies aimed at addressing racial disparities, many critics argued that these measures were insufficient and often overshadowed by divisive rhetoric and actions. "However," she interjected as he paused for breath, "many community leaders argue that your administration's approach to issues like police reform and housing has actually exacerbated existing inequalities. How do you reconcile those criticisms with your claims of progress?" Trump's demeanor shifted slightly. He appeared taken aback by her follow-up. "Look," he said dismissively, "you can always find people who will criticize. But let me tell you something, I've been very clear about my stance on law enforcement. We need to support our police. Without them, we wouldn't have safety in our communities." The tension in the room thickened as journalists exchanged glances. Some nodded in agreement with her assertive questioning, while others seemed apprehensive about pushing back against Trump's narrative. The journalist felt a sense of urgency. This was a pivotal moment not just for her, but for everyone who had been affected by policies that often neglected their voices. "Mr. Trump," she pressed further, "many people feel that your rhetoric has contributed to an environment where racial tensions have escalated rather than improved. How do you plan to address those concerns moving forward?" Trump's expression hardened slightly. "I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying," he retorted sharply. "I'm all about law and order. We can't let chaos reign in our streets." His tone was defensive now, as if he sensed that her questions were challenging his carefully crafted narrative. The room buzzed with energy as other journalists began raising their hands, eager to join the conversation, sparked by her bold inquiry. Trump glanced around before choosing another reporter who had been waiting patiently. As he moved on to answer another question, the journalist felt a mix of emotions: satisfaction at having posed her questions, but frustration at how easily Trump deflected accountability. She knew that this exchange would be scrutinized by viewers and commentators alike. It could either be seen as a victory for journalistic integrity or dismissed as just another moment in a contentious press conference. Reactions from the audience. In the aftermath of her question and Trump's response, reactions began to ripple through the room like waves in a pond. Some journalists leaned forward eagerly, jotting down notes and preparing their own questions inspired by her boldness. Others exchanged looks of disbelief or concern. Was this really how they were going to engage with pressing issues? A veteran reporter seated nearby leaned over and whispered, "That was brave of you." She smiled appreciatively, but remained focused on the unfolding dialogue. This was not just about her, it was about bringing attention to critical issues that needed addressing. Meanwhile, Trump continued fielding questions from other reporters, but there was an undeniable shift in energy within the room. The atmosphere felt charged with a new sense of urgency. Discussions about race relations were no longer relegated to whispers behind closed doors. They were front and center in one of America's most public arenas. As more questions emerged regarding his policies and their impact on marginalized communities, it became clear that many journalists were emboldened by her courage. They began probing deeper into topics that had long been avoided or glossed over in previous press conferences. The journalist felt a sense of camaraderie with her peers as they collectively navigated this momentous occasion. This press conference had transformed into an opportunity for meaningful dialogue, a chance to confront uncomfortable truths head-on. As Trump wrapped up his remarks and exited the stage, amid applause from supporters in attendance, she reflected on what had transpired. This moment would resonate far beyond the walls of this briefing room. It would spark conversations across newsrooms nationwide about race, representation, and accountability. She knew that while one press conference could not change everything overnight, it could serve as a catalyst for ongoing discussions about how journalism could better serve all communities, especially those historically marginalized in media narratives. With renewed determination, she prepared to write her piece on the event, one that would not only capture Trump's responses, but also highlight the importance of asking tough questions and holding leaders accountable for their actions. Aftermath and broader implications. As the press conference concluded and reporters began to disperse, the atmosphere in the room was charged with a mix of excitement and reflection. The journalist who had posed the bold question felt a sense of accomplishment. She had not only challenged Trump directly, but had also opened up a space for dialogue that many had longed for. In the days that followed, her question and Trump's responses became a focal point in media discussions. News outlets across the country picked up on the exchange, analyzing it from various angles. Social media erupted with reactions, some praising her courage, while others criticized her approach. Hashtags like #press freedom and #accountability trended as people engaged in heated debates about the role of journalists in holding leaders accountable. Media reactions. Major news networks featured segments dissecting the press conference, with pundits weighing in on whether Trump's responses were sufficient or evasive. Some commentators applauded the journalist for her bravery, noting that it was essential for reporters to confront powerful figures with uncomfortable truths. Others argued that while her question was valid, it could have been framed differently to elicit a more constructive response. The journalist found herself at the center of this media whirlwind. Interviews flooded in from various platforms, eager to hear her perspective on the exchange. She spoke about her motivations for asking the question, emphasizing that it was not just about Trump, but about amplifying voices that had often been silenced in mainstream discourse. "Journalism is about holding power accountable," she stated during one interview. "It's about ensuring that all communities are represented and heard. My question was meant to challenge narratives that often overlook systemic issues affecting Black Americans." Public reactions. Public reaction was equally polarized. Many people expressed gratitude for her courage, viewing it as a necessary step toward addressing racial inequalities in America. Activists and community leaders praised her for bringing attention to issues that were often sidelined in political discussions. On the other hand, some supporters of Trump dismissed her question as an attempt to undermine his presidency. They argued that his administration had made significant strides in improving conditions for Black Americans and viewed her inquiry as an example of biased journalism. In online forums and comment sections, discussions flourished. Some users shared personal stories about how policies enacted during Trump's presidency had impacted their lives, both positively and negatively. These narratives highlighted the complexities of race relations in America and underscored the need for nuanced conversations. Impact on journalism. The press conference also sparked broader conversations within journalism about representation and accountability. News organizations began to reflect on their own practices regarding diversity in reporting and how they could better serve marginalized communities. Many outlets recognized that elevating diverse voices was not just a matter of fairness, but essential for comprehensive reporting. In editorial meetings across the country, discussions emerged about how to approach stories related to race and inequality more thoughtfully. Journalists began advocating for more robust coverage of systemic issues rather than simply reporting on isolated incidents or political rhetoric. The NABJ also seized this moment to emphasize its mission further. They organized panels and discussions aimed at educating journalists about best practices for covering race-related topics sensitively and accurately. The organization encouraged its members to continue pushing boundaries, reminding them that their voices mattered in shaping narratives around race and justice. The journalist's reflection. As she navigated this newfound attention, the journalist took time to reflect on her journey. She remembered her early days in journalism, struggling to find her voice amid a predominantly white industry, grappling with challenges that came with being a black woman in media. This moment felt like a culmination of years of hard work, perseverance, and dedication to telling stories that mattered. She understood that while she had taken a significant step by asking her question, there was still much work to be done. The fight for equity in journalism was ongoing, and she was committed to being part of that change. In interviews, she often emphasized the importance of solidarity among journalists. We must support one another in our efforts to challenge power dynamics and ensure all voices are heard, she said passionately. Every time we ask tough questions or highlight overlooked stories, we contribute to a larger movement for justice. Moving forward. With renewed determination, she continued her reporting work while advocating for greater representation within newsrooms. She collaborated with fellow journalists to create mentorship programs aimed at supporting young, aspiring reporters from diverse backgrounds. Her bold question at the press conference had sparked not just a momentary dialogue, but an ongoing conversation about race relations in America, a conversation that needed continuous nurturing and engagement. As months passed, she remained vigilant in holding leaders accountable while also amplifying stories from communities often left unheard. She understood that journalism was not just about reporting facts, it was about weaving together narratives that reflected the complexities of society. With each article she wrote and each interview she conducted, she sought to bridge gaps between communities, to foster understanding through storytelling. Her commitment to social justice remained unwavering as she navigated this ever-evolving landscape. Ultimately, she knew that every question asked could lead to deeper inquiries into systemic issues. Every story told could inspire change. Every voice amplified could contribute to a more equitable future. And so, as she prepared for future assignments, whether covering local events or national politics, she carried with her the lessons learned from that pivotal press conference, the power of questions, the importance of representation, and the necessity of holding those in power accountable, ongoing efforts and evolving landscape. In the months following the press conference, the journalist found herself at a crossroads in her career. The attention she received had opened doors, but it also came with heightened expectations. She was determined to leverage this moment not just for her own advancement, but to advocate for broader changes within journalism. A new initiative inspired by the conversation sparked by her bold question, she initiated a project aimed at amplifying voices from underrepresented communities. Partnering with local advocacy groups and fellow journalists, she launched a series of workshops designed to educate aspiring reporters about the nuances of covering race and social justice issues. These workshops provided practical training on storytelling techniques, ethical reporting practices, and the importance of community engagement. I want to create a space where young journalists feel empowered to tell their stories, she explained during one session. It's crucial that we have diverse perspectives in our newsrooms, stories that reflect the realities of all Americans. The workshops quickly gained traction, attracting participants from various backgrounds who were eager to learn and share their experiences. The journalist felt invigorated by the energy in the room. It reminded her of her early days in journalism when she had sought guidance and mentorship. Media collaborations. As her initiative grew, she began collaborating with media organizations to ensure that stories from marginalized communities received the attention they deserved. She pitched ideas for feature articles that highlighted local activists, community leaders, and grassroots movements working toward social change. These stories aimed to shift narratives away from sensationalism and focus on resilience and hope. Her efforts resonated within the industry. Several news outlets recognized the need for more inclusive reporting practices and began re-evaluating their editorial policies. Discussions around diversity in hiring practices gained momentum, leading to commitments from some organizations to prioritize representation in their newsrooms. The impact of her question. The impact of her question during that pivotal press conference continued to reverberate throughout media circles. It served as a reminder of the responsibility journalists hold in shaping public discourse. Many reporters cited her inquiry as a catalyst for their own willingness to ask difficult questions about race and inequality. In interviews, she often reflected on how one moment could lead to significant change. It's about more than just asking questions. It's about creating a culture where accountability is expected, she stated passionately. Every time we challenge narratives that perpetuate injustice, we contribute to a larger movement for equity. A broader movement. As discussions around race relations intensified across the nation, sparked by protests, social movements, and calls for systemic reform, the journalist felt a renewed sense of purpose. She understood that her role was not just as an observer, but as an active participant in advocating for change. She continued writing articles that addressed pressing issues such as police reform, housing inequality, and economic disparities affecting Black communities. Each piece was meticulously researched and grounded in first-hand accounts from those directly impacted by these issues. Through her work, she aimed to humanize complex topics, providing readers with insights that went beyond statistics and sound bites. She believed that storytelling had the power to foster empathy and understanding, a vital component in bridging divides within society. Looking ahead, as she looked toward the future, she remained optimistic about the potential for journalism to evolve into a more inclusive field. The conversations initiated by her question were just the beginning. They represented a growing awareness among journalists about their role in addressing systemic issues. With each workshop she conducted and every article she published, she was contributing to a legacy of accountability and representation in journalism. She knew that while challenges remained, there was also immense potential for growth and transformation within the industry. In her heart, she carried a commitment to continue pushing boundaries, both for herself and for those whose stories needed telling. As she prepared for future assignments, she felt invigorated by the knowledge that journalism could be a powerful tool for change, a means to elevate voices that had long been silenced. And so, with renewed determination, she stepped into her next chapter, ready to ask tough questions, tell important stories, and advocate for justice in every form. Continued journey and challenges. As the months rolled on, the journalist immersed herself in her work, driven by a passion for storytelling that could affect change. Her workshops had become a cornerstone of her outreach efforts, fostering a new generation of journalists equipped to tackle issues of race and inequality. However, the path was not without its challenges. Facing resistance. Despite the positive momentum, she encountered resistance from various quarters. Some established media figures questioned her approach, arguing that focusing too heavily on race could alienate audiences. "You can't always frame every story through the lens of race," one senior editor remarked during a meeting. "It risks coming off as divisive." The journalist understood their concerns, but firmly believed that ignoring systemic issues would perpetuate ignorance. "If we don't acknowledge how race intersects with every aspect of life in America, education, healthcare, employment, we're failing our audience," she countered passionately. "Our job is to illuminate these connections, not shy away from them." These discussions often left her feeling frustrated but also more determined. She knew that pushing for change within entrenched systems required resilience and persistence. It was essential to engage in these conversations, even when they were uncomfortable. Building community connections. To bolster her efforts, she focused on building stronger connections within her community. She attended local events, engaged with activists, and listened to the concerns of residents firsthand. This grassroots approach not only enriched her understanding, but also helped her identify stories that resonated deeply with those she aimed to represent. One evening, while attending a community forum on housing inequality, she met a group of passionate advocates fighting against displacement in their neighborhood. Their stories were powerful, tales of families forced out of their homes due to rising rents and gentrification. Inspired by their resilience, she collaborated with them to produce a series of articles that highlighted their struggles and proposed solutions. "Your voices matter," she told them during a brainstorming session. "Let's make sure your stories reach a wider audience." Together they crafted narratives that not only informed but also inspired action within the community. The power of storytelling. As she published more pieces highlighting local issues, she began to see tangible results. Community members started organizing town halls to address housing policies and demand accountability from local officials. The articles sparked discussions that had been long overdue, conversations about equity, justice, and the importance of inclusive policymaking. Her work gained recognition beyond her immediate community as well. National outlets picked up her stories, amplifying the voices of those who had previously been unheard. The journalist received messages from readers across the country expressing gratitude for shedding light on issues they faced in their own communities. "Your reporting gave us hope," one reader wrote. "It showed us that we're not alone in this fight." Such feedback fueled her passion for journalism and reinforced her belief in its power to effect change, a defining moment. One particularly impactful article centered around a local housing initiative aimed at providing affordable housing options for low-income families. She spent weeks interviewing residents, policymakers, and advocates to capture the multifaceted nature of the issue. The piece highlighted not only the struggles but also the innovative solutions being proposed by community members themselves. When it was published, it garnered significant attention, drawing responses from local government officials who had previously been unresponsive to residents' concerns. They reached out for meetings to discuss how they could collaborate on implementing some of the proposed solutions. "This is what journalism can do," she reflected as she prepared for those meetings. "It can bridge gaps between communities and decision-makers." Looking ahead, despite the successes and recognition she received, the journalist remained grounded in her mission. She understood that there was still much work to be done, not just in her community but across the nation as conversations about race and equity continued to evolve. As she looked ahead to future projects, she envisioned expanding her workshops beyond local boundaries, offering training sessions in other cities grappling with similar issues. She wanted to create a network of journalists committed to covering race and social justice comprehensively and sensitively. In doing so, she hoped to inspire others to join this vital work, to recognize that their voices mattered and that they could contribute meaningfully to societal change through journalism. a commitment to justice. With each passing day, she reaffirmed her commitment to justice through storytelling. The challenges were significant. Resistance from within media organizations persisted, and systemic inequalities remained deeply rooted in society. Yet she held on to hope, the belief that every question asked could lead to deeper understanding and every story told could inspire action. As she prepared for another workshop session, filled with eager young journalists ready to learn about covering race-related topics, she felt a profound sense of purpose wash over her. This was more than just a career, it was a calling, a chance to be part of something larger than herself. With renewed determination, she stepped into the future, ready to ask tough questions, tell important stories, and advocate for justice in every form.